And good morning, everyone. We continue studying the book for the full devotion, and this is the book which discusses the service to God as we are in the midst of discussing. And the Rebbe had begun this discourse by discussing what the Torah says in the Parsha of Mishpatim, the 18th Torah portion, or the 6th portion of the second book. And God promises the Jewish people that when you worship me, He will bless your bread, in other words, your sustenance. There won't be any barren women. And so that means there'll be children, there'll be sustenance, there'll be health, everything will be wonderful. But it is predicated by serving God. We went into a long discussion about what does God really need from us. If He's asking us to be His servant, our servant fulfills a need. Does God really have a need? Does He have needs that we can fulfill?
Oh, that's my coffee.
Okay, and at the end result was that God does, in the essence of God, there is no need. The essence of God that is completely removed, that is spiritual, that is the most spiritual thing that can be, the complete essence of God, everything is fine there. It is the projection that comes out of God, the light and the energy that is produced by God, that's where things can be altered. For example, when it comes to an energy that's coming out of the light, so the essence of the light, the ball of fire that we call the sun, doesn't need anything. It doesn't need fuel. It's burning on its own. It's producing as much heat as you want. It doesn't need anything. It's after it comes out of there, where the light is produced, not the essence, but when the light is produced from that essence, that's when things can be changed. In fact, things have to be changed, or else you won't get them properly. See, if you want proper light, thank you. If you want proper light, then you have to be in this world millions of miles away from the sun, or else it won't be light. It will be dark, or it'll be too hot, it'll be too cold, it'll be too dark. You won't get the light properly. Furthermore, if you really want light, you're going to have to change it around. You're going to have to filter it in order for you to use it. So if you want your light to come into your house, you have to make appropriate windows so that the light can come in. Too much light means that it'll be too bright. Too little light, and then you might need some curtains. There's all kinds of filtration systems that we need. Similarly, the energy that comes from God's essence doesn't need a thing. It's there. It's only after things come from God, in order for them to be able to be projected into this world properly, the world needs to needs to produce some filtration, and not just the world, but all the levels that come before this world, before this universe, also need to serve as a filtration system, so that whatever comes out to this world is perfect in the way it is. That was basically the point that we've discussed on that.
Sorry, I didn't have my camera.
It's cold, and it's chamomile. I don't want this.
It's
Pete, no, I don't want. Why is it cold?
Huh?
How come it's cold?
I don't know.
You pull it out of the plug?
Didn't you refill it?
Yeah, but I think the plug might be pulled out, or the fuse might be. Is the green light on the coffee?
No. Yeah, this is off.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, continue your quest.
All right.
You know what?
Chapter
Put some
4.
ice cubes in there. You can make an iced tea.
There you go.
Be
I
optimistic.
like iced tea.
That's gonna make noise.
Didn't I fill it up?
Yeah.
What happened? You pulled it out?
Not me. Nope.
I filled it up about an hour and a half ago. So it's still cold. All right. Chapter 4. However, it is still necessary to understand how the verse, "You shall serve the Lord your God," refers not only at levels within Seder Hishtalshalut, where the concept of avoda applies, as mentioned earlier, but also to a level that transcends Hishtalshalut. The word Hishtalshalut, as we've discussed many times, means the chain reaction. The chain reaction is where one level leads into another level, into another level, into another level. So just try to imagine a long tube, and each part of the tube does another filtration system. The water's going through sand filtration, and then plastic filtration, and then this kind of filtration, chemical filtration, until you get to the end of the tube. So that's the Hishtalshalut. Hishtalshalut means chain reaction, linked one into the other. So when things are linked one to the other, and there is a filtration system, so our service can turn on the spigot, make it go a little faster, or a little better, or a little less, or a little more. We can affect it through our service. We serve God, and the spigot is opened, and you get all these blessings. If you don't serve God that well, or if there's some issues in the between, things become a little clogged up, and they don't come down as forceful and as blessing as you want them to be. Get that? But we're talking about levels that are above that tube, above that link, regular transmission, the way the service is supposed to come along. In that case, how does one affect that? How does one get to a point where it's above the regular routine link after link, chain after chain link? How does it happen? Transcends Hishtalshalut. He came along and talked about how there is a system of energy, and then there are the vessels that facilitate this energy, that receive this energy, that do something with this energy. That's the regular, normal way of transmission. But what about things that transcend that? They go higher than that, above that. How does one's service affect that level as well? I understand it doesn't affect the essence of God. I get that. But there are levels that are lower than the essence of God that are also part of the projection of energy that don't work in the regular routine. They are transcendent levels that are projected by God for whatever reason, and they don't go through the normal routine. It means you get an unfiltered cigarette. You get the whole brunt of it. Now, how does that work? So let's see how he goes through this now. This will be understood by first analyzing the wording of this verse, which appears to contradict itself from beginning to end. So the verse that he's based his whole essay on, worship or serve God and he will bless your bread, and so on, seems to contradict itself. In the beginning, the verse states, and you shall serve the Lord your God, and he shall bless. In the third person, you serve, he blesses. Later, the verse says, and I will take away, I will remove all illnesses, sicknesses. I will take away. In the first person, as if God was speaking about himself. So if I said to you, June, when you go home and you get into your house, and people come around over there and do this, should I go and make myself a tea? Oh, it's you coming? Who is it? Who are you talking about? Me, you, who's coming, who's people? You start off with the generalization, and then you sort of start saying, oh, and I will bless. You should say, worship me, and I will bless your bread, and I will remove your sickness. Instead, he says, worship the God, Lord your God, and he will bless, and I will remove your sickness. Who are you talking about? If you're talking about God, if God is saying these words, say, worship me, who you can add, who I happen to be the Lord your God, and I will bless your bread, and I will remove, instead of saying, in the third person, worship the Lord your God, and he will do this, and then I will remove this. This doesn't make any sense. Are you talking about God all the way through? Then just say me. It's me talking. Later, the verse states, and I will take away the first person as if God was speaking about himself. If you speak about yourself, then stick with yourself. If you're speaking in a third party, that's okay. Then stick the whole verse that way. Make the whole verse sound this way. The verse could have said, worship the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and the thing, and he will remove all sickness from you. The resolution of this is based on Nachmanides. Nachmanides is known as the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. as opposed to the Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, who we call Maimonides. Des is a Greek addition to a name, which indicates that it's the son of. So Maimonides would be the son of Maimon, and Nachmanides is the son of Nachman. Both of them lived in a similar time. Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, Maimonides, was a major codifier of law, in addition to everything else that he did, and so he's perhaps more known. He's also a major philosopher and medicine expert. He was a doctor. Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, was an incredible scholar and an unbelievable leader. They both originated in Spain in the 1100s. Rabbi Moshe ben Maimonides, was forced to flee because of our peace-loving brothers, cousins, who were running through Spain during that time. And Rabbi Moshe ben Nachmanides, was forced to go because of Christian issues in Spain, and he ended up going to Israel, Nachmanides. And the Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, also eventually went to Israel but couldn't sustain himself, and he left to Egypt, to Morocco. He ended up living in both countries, but Morocco and in Egypt, and he's buried in Israel. The Rambam, that's Maimonides. Nachmanides was also ended up staying in Jerusalem. He has a synagogue that he established over there, but it was already late in his life, and he didn't live that many years in Israel. He is known, while the Maimonides is known for his major codification of law. He's the only one who writes law as the law. He selects the law out of the entire Talmud and whatever is available. And he writes laws about all 613 laws, as opposed to the code of Jewish law that you find today that does not cover the laws of purity and impurity, laws of the temple. The Rambam says, I'm giving you the laws of the entire Torah. So it's all here. And we study Rambam every single day, three chapters of the day. So we finish within a year. We finish this whole 14 massive, major, mega volume of law. Nachmanides was known for a commentary in a lot of different places, but his commentary on the Torah is one that's printed in most versions of the Torah, and in there you can find a tremendous amount of scholarship and answers to many different questions. And this kind of question is something that he would deal with. You know that he's going to deal with this, and he can go on and on about this. And he stands up and he says, "Oh, Rashi, I love you, Rashi, but you're wrong here." He's pretty forceful when he presents himself, and he throws all kinds of proofs and reasons and things when he wants to make a point. Here's one classic major disagreement that he has with Rambam and with Rashi. Nachmanides says that the purpose of the temple was, it's yesterday's Torah portion, was to offer sacrifices. Whereas Rambam and Rashi may say that the main focus of the temple was the ark, and the Torah in the ark, and God's communication to people from the ark. And that's amazing. It goes back and forth. It's very consistent in all of these portions that discuss it. They bring all the proofs in the thing. As I said before, this is why the Torah uses this verse over here, and they continue to cross-reference back and forth. So this is how the commentaries come across and come along and explain things. So Nachmanides tackles this verse, which has seemingly a contradiction, because in the beginning it talks in the third person, and in the end it talks in the singular person, I. So based on Nachmanides, in the introduction to his commentary on the Torah, in his introduction he says as follows: our teacher Moses did not write the Torah, which is, in other words, the first 4 books, in the first person. The first 4 books of the Torah are books that basically it tells you the story, and then it tells you the commandments. The fifth book it begins with, it's a book, Deuteronomy, or Devarim. The word Deuteronomy means words. The word Devarim also means words. That's the fifth name of the fifth book of the Torah. What are the words? These are the words that Moses spoke. It's part of the Torah, but they are now more in Moses saying, I said, and I did, and I went, and I told you, and I went to you, and we went, did this, and we traveled here. So it's more like him talking to the people. The first four books, he doesn't write it in that type of manner. We went, we came. It's more a narrative. It's just a story. So Moses did not write the Torah in the first books in the first person, but in the third person. It doesn't say I, it doesn't say we, it doesn't say this happened to us. He just says, and the Jewish people went. It's always in the third person. And God came and spoke to the people. It doesn't say to us. It doesn't write it that way. The Torah is written in a different, as a story that everybody can sort of think that it's written to me. The narrator is either Moses, nor God's name Havaya is neither Moses, not either. The narrator is neither Moses. It's not that Moses says, I said and I went and I told you, nor God's name Havaya. Havaya is God's main name. We'll see footnote 45 in a minute. We'll talk about Havaya. But seemingly a third person, as evident from Havaya, or God spoke to Moses saying. It doesn't say God spoke to us. It doesn't say God spoke to me. It says God spoke to Moses, as if somebody's telling a story. It's a narrative. Somebody's telling a story about what happened. But Moses was writing it as things were happening. And he doesn't write, and we went here yesterday, or we came here the other day, or it's not we. It's in the third person. This is just a very, very big sidebar. It has nothing to do with what we're learning. But when I write the Good Shabbos email, I'm very careful not to write our, and we should know, or we received the Torah. I think it's unprofessional when you're writing something where people, and God tells us. What do you mean tells us? He tells everybody. It's not us. So I try very, very hard, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, not to write we and our, and we need to learn that. Not we. One needs to learn. People need to learn. I make it more general so so people can say, and what if I don't? Am I not part of the we? So I leave that out. You read a lot of times that people are writing commentary, and they're writing about how God spoke to us and God told us. And the Talmud tells us. Talmud doesn't tell us. The Talmud tells everyone. It's not us. It's a pet peeve of mine. And in writing, I believe, it's my belief, that one should be careful not to write we or us. I wrote we Atlantans because that was all of us affected by the snow. No one could say I wasn't affected. But usually speaking, that's how the Torah also presents itself. Not the fifth book, but the 4 books of the Torah never say we. Because the Torah is talking to everyone in all generations. So it's never we and us. It's always in the third person. Now, this is not Moses speaking, for in that case it would have stated, and Havaya spoke to me, God spoke to me. Nor are these the words of Havaya, the words of God, for it would have stated, and I spoke to Moses. Rather, it is not Havaya, not Moses, but seemingly a third entity who narrates and tells of the words of Havaya to Moses. Okay, now who's Havaya? What's this Havaya all about? So let's look at 45. Havaya, the ineffable divine name, or tetragrammaton. Tetragrammaton. You got that word?
It'll be in my next composition.
Tetragrammaton is another one of these Greek words.
Yes. Some spelling bee.
Tetragrammaton?
Yeah, really?
Tetragrammaton is another one of these Greek words that means the most intense or the highest or whatever. He's trying to explain something in English that nobody speaks. It's like saying tefillin. So the word for tefillin in English is phylacteries. Now you know what tefillin are? That's another Greek word. So when people say tefillin, which means phylacteries, so how do you know what phylacteries mean? So, or when someone says, the Talmud in the tractate of, the what? The tractate? Who uses that word today? It's a volume. It's a Greek word that people adopted like 100 years ago when they were trying to explain what it was. Maybe they used Greek more then. Today we just say volume this and volume that. Anyway, so Havaya is the ineffable divine name, or the tetragrammaton, composed of the four letters Yud, Hey, and Vav, and Hey. Those are the name that we don't pronounce the way it's written. There is a Christian group called the J Witnesses, some witnesses. We don't pronounce. We're not allowed to say that. It's actually forbidden in the Torah to pronounce that name, or even to write want to write this name of this group, we write the J Witnesses. And in fact, the high priest in the temple never pronounced God's name loud after people were starting to take it. The nations of the world started to take those names. A lot of things, we spoke about this yesterday. For those who did show up for services, heard that there were things that were going on in the temple that nobody knew, no one else knew, like certain ingredients that went into certain things that they were doing there, or certain words that they were pronouncing, because they didn't want it to get out to the rest of the world. So we specifically never, not once, do we ever pronounce God's name, which is the big name of Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. Instead, we don't say Baruch Atah, we say Baruch Atah Ado. Ad, it doesn't say Adon. It just says Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey there. So we should pronounce it really but we don't. We pronounce it Adon. And the reason we do that is because we're not supposed to pronounce God's main name.
Rabbi, where does it say not to pronounce it? I wonder
Nice. Where does it say not to pronounce God's name? Where does it say? No, Ten Commandments doesn't say not to pronounce God's name in vain. That's different. But if not in vain, if you're praying, if you're davening, No. Well, it's in law. It's in the law. It's learned from. It's going to go way off base here, but it's during the dialogue of Moses at the burning bush. God says, at the burning bush.
Okay, you said Moses.
Yeah, so Moses was at the burning bush, and God was talking to Moses, and he says to God, when I come to the people and they're going to ask me what is his name, they're going to ask me what is it. What should I tell them? So God gives them a name that no one ever heard of, not before, not since. And the name, he says, go tell them Ehyeh sent you. Ehyeh means I will be. In other words, I have been with them and I will continue to be with them, even though it doesn't look like I'm there. That's the first one. Then there's another verse. We spoke about this last year at length. I wrote a whole article about this 2 years ago, maybe. Then he says, and God said again further to Moses, tell them that the God, and he uses the real name, the proper name, of your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob sent you. This is my name for all eternity, and this is the way you remember me from generation to generation. That's very strange words. But the word for all eternity, that word in the Torah, this is my name for all eternity, that word is missing a letter. And so if you didn't read it with the vowels, you would read it as this is my name to be hidden. When the Torah presents it, it says this is my name for all eternity, but the word olam means world. But the same word for world, meaning olam, if you take out the o, the vav, it turns to elam, which means hidden. Now the reason why the world means hidden, and why the word for world as the same word as hidden, is because the world really hides God. Because when you look at the world, you don't see God anymore, you see the world. Now, when the Torah is talking about God's name, it's missing that letter. God writes every single letter. Every single letter in the Torah is written by God, dictated to Moses to write by God. So the fact that it's missing there is an indication that the name of God must be hidden. In other words, it cannot be used all the time. So in the time of the temple, where God's home, so the name of God was pronounced the way it should be named. It should be. Later, when people began to abuse it, it was only used on Yom Kippur and during the main dramatic time. You know, when we bow down in the shul, during those times, it said, and they said the great name of God, and everybody would bow down, fall on their faces, and say, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Olam Va'ed, blessed be the name of God forever. But that was only then. And that was very dramatic. Everybody would bow down during that time. But generally, to use God's name, it shouldn't be used. It's learned from here, the fact that that one letter is missing in the context of saying or remembering or stating God's name. That's the small version. One of the longer versions, not for now, but that's if you want to know where it is, it's in the first portion of the second book of the Torah, chapter 3 of the book of Exodus. And over time, you will get to learn that many rules and laws are actually learned from an addition or a subtraction of one single letter. Lots of the laws of Sukkot are learned from that. The fact that a letter is missing in some of the contexts. That's why the Torah you can't really know the Torah properly unless you get into the Talmud and the oral Torah where they show us. Now, even at the times of Moses, they didn't call God by that name. When the Talmudic sages came along to discover why they were doing things this way, they had to open the Torah and look at these things very carefully. If they had tradition, they had the tradition of where it comes from. And many times they had to find it themselves. But the Torah contains everything. It might contain it with an addition of one single letter or a subtraction of one single letter. That's what makes the Torah amazing, because it has everything in it, except you have to go through layers sometimes in order to get it. Some things are very not clear. The laws of tefillin are very not clear. The laws of mezuzah are not clear. The laws of Shabbos are very unclear. Fundamentals of Judaism, laws of kosher, are hardly, very, very unclear. Just several rules. But those rules tell you so much. As soon as you open up the rest of the Torah, you begin to see how these rules are all consistent. Every single one of them is consistent with what it says. And if it's not consistent, it says, this is the custom around here. And others have customs differently. But the laws are all taken from the Torah. Nothing is changed. Nothing is deviated from the Torah. So those who say that man can change around the Torah are obviously missing the point. You cannot change the Torah. And the rabbis didn't come to change anything. They came just to expose, just to teach. And the Talmud is very important because the Talmud doesn't just say this is the rule. The Talmud says, Rabbi so-and-so says this is the rule. Rabbi so-and-so says that is the rule. And then these people are basically challenged. You can go on for page after page. But how could you say this when it says that? How could you say, there's no statements. Any statement is challenged. And that's where you get to the bottom of things. How did we get to this? So it's all consistent. And as I said, some of the main fundamental parts of being Jewish are unclear in the Torah. People say, well, what does it say? All it says, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. Does that mean not to mix milk and meat? Of course, if you read it the way it's written, that's very simple. That's all it says. But that's not what the Torah wasn't designed to be that way. The Torah was designed to be very brief, concise, get the outline in there, but everything is there. Just you have to know how to read it. And that's why it's hard in translation, you lose most of this. You would never know. If I translated the Torah properly, I would say, this is my name for all eternity. I wouldn't say, this is my name to be hidden. It's not what the word says. But when you write the word and you're missing a letter, there's a lot of things that can be studied from that. That's how the Torah is adapted. That's how the Torah is used for law and for tradition and so on. Okay, now back to 45.
That was a big one. I really appreciate it.
You can always ask questions. In the words of the Talmud itself, The word of the Talmud, the Talmud says, the shy one, the embarrassed one who's embarrassed to ask questions can never learn. And in Judaism, as opposed to every single other religion, our mantra, our banner is to ask questions. We want our kids at the Seder to ask questions. We are going to do things to do differently so that the kids should say, Ma nishtana, why is it different? What's going on here? So questions are extremely important. And I never say don't ask questions. It could be that I won't be able to answer it on the spot, takes up too much time, or diversion away from the focus. But still, a question should never be embarrassed. And nobody should be embarrassed to ask a question. Never. There's no stupid question in Judaism, and there is no such thing as don't ask any questions, my son. Just do it. Questions on God, that we can that I don't know. But the questions, where do we learn things from? Why are you doing this? In Jewish law, it says that when you're sitting at a court, or you're sitting with a rabbi, and he says, do so-and-so, you have full right to say, where are you taking that from? Where are you getting this from? My father was reading the Good Shabbos email last night, and he wrote me 3 questions. Number 1, what's the source? Very beautiful thought. Where did you get this from? Is this something that you came up with yourself, or did you find this somewhere else? Number 2, you wrote that the Sinai returned back to normalcy, to being a regular mountain within a year. A year, he says? The Torah says when the shofar will be blown, then you can go back on the mountain. Shofar was blown at the 10 Commandments. Where did you find this from? Who told you it was a year? So my father doesn't let me off the hook. I can't remember what else he was asking. So I wrote back to him. I said the source of the thought was from the Rebbe in 2 different places, and here you can find a page here and page this. This is where you can find where I got it from.
God bless you.
Gesund.
Thank you.
And the fact that you asked this question about the log of the horn, I said that's in the Talmud in a certain place, and this in this page, and this in this place, in this section of the thing. And one of the commentaries explains that the energy of God remained on the mountain for almost a year. It remained until they finished construction of this sanctuary, and until the day that God entered into the sanctuary. Until that point, the cloud of God was on top of the mountain, and it was then transferred into the sanctuary. This is what Rashi says on the Talmud in a certain volume of the Talmud. And you could look it up there. Now, according to Rashi's commentary on the Torah, he seems not to, in the commentary on the Torah, he only sticks to the simple meaning. But in the Talmud, Rashi gets into a little bit more of the juice of everything, of the energy of everything. And he spends a long time explaining why he feels that the Mount Sinai remained in its holiness, where people couldn't even touch the mountain for close to a year. So I said, here is the reference to that. Everybody has a right to ask, where are you getting this from? Like, where you write things. If you write things without sources, then at least provide those who want to know where you get them from. You can't just write things. Like, who are you? You decided when God moved stuff from the mountain. How do you get there? You have to be careful with what you write. You can't just write things. Now, there's sometimes the Good Shabbos email thoughts are coming from me. That's the way I understood something, or I understand something. 95% of the time, though, it's not really from me. It's an adaptation from commentaries and ideas that are developed by others who come before me. In my personal copy of the weekly Good Shabbos email, I always write at the bottom where I took the idea from. Because if I want to, if it ever wants to come out in a book, I'm always going to write where I took it from. Generally, every week, it's just a thought. It's a quick thing, read it, 5 minutes, it's gone. But if you're going to publish something, you want to publish according to the way you understood something that somebody developed, or as a theme that someone wrote. It could be from one paragraph of the Rebbe, and that one paragraph helps me, it gives a clearer explanation about a lot of other things. The book of Proverbs says, give something to a wise person, and he will be wiser through it. He will wisen it up, kind of thing. In other words, give people some core ideas, and they'll be able to develop it. And there's a lot of things from the Rebbe that he just discusses maybe in a page or two, but you can really, if you want to expand it, you can really expand on those things. Anyway, I'm a student of the Rebbe, I'm a follower of the Rebbe, so he's my main source of ideas. Sometimes I've had people, colleagues, have written to me and said, where did you get that from? On this and this page, it doesn't seem to be saying that. I said, yeah, but if you look at that footnote on the bottom, just those 3 words changes around the whole meaning of, and from there, that's where I understood it. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way I got it. And if it doesn't make sense, then I better change it. I love that when people ask me these kind of questions, because that means that, first of all, people are reading what I'm saying. And second of all, it makes me think more carefully. It makes me be more honest to what is out there. You can't just simply make statements. If you make statements, nobody will take you seriously.
And you can't follow it unless you know why you're following.
You can't follow.
Well, like not to pronounce the unpronounceable name unless you know why you're not.
Well, you can follow it without the why. If I told you don't, it's no. But now if you said, are you sure about that? And could you provide a source? Which, by the way, you have every single right in the world to say that. That's not disrespectful. That means I want to learn. This is a very, very, very extreme case, and you're going to really laugh at this, or you're going to say what? But I'm even hesitant to say it here. But once I've let the cat out of the bag. The Talmud tells a story of a certain Talmudic sage that went under the bed of a great Talmudic sage because he wanted to know how to behave when you're with your wife. Remember now, things weren't written. Things weren't written as clear. There was no manuals those days. The Talmud hadn't been written even. And after a while, the guy, and he was doing what he was doing, and the guy under the bed was so shocked by this. Either he hadn't been married yet, or he didn't know what to do with his wife. And he said to this rabbi, "That's how far you go in this." He was really talking with his wife and playing with her, and there was a lot of prior, So he says, "You're challenging me about how far to go? What are you doing here? This is my private." He's like, "How far do you go?"
Right.
So he answers, "Torah. This is Torah, and I'm here to learn. That's all I'm here for. I'm not here to snoop on anything. I'm not here for any other reason other than to know how the Torah mandates this."
It wouldn't fly today.
Yeah, if you know who this rabbi was and who the rabbi under the bed was, some of the greatest sages, you take him more seriously. It sounds like a funny story, and it is really. It is a crazy story. But the people, the caliber of the people who were there, you can take them seriously. They really meant it that way. But he doesn't say to him, "I don't care what Torah it is, get the whatever out of my house right away. I never want to see your face again. You intruder! I'm calling the police." He didn't say that. He realized that this guy is truly trying to learn. Now, if you're trying to learn, why don't you just say, "Hey, buddy," and we talk about it? But he didn't want to talk about it because he didn't feel it was modesty enough. But he said, "If you go under the bed, nobody doesn't say a word. I could just, if I go under the bed and I just hear and follow what's going on, then I don't have to say a word." And he doesn't have to say a word. But it became to a point where he couldn't control himself. It was, "Is this how far you go? This is what you do?" If you want to know the details, talk to me later. Let's turn off the camera while we're. So, the questions of how to do things or why you say things are very, very much legitimate. And there's no such thing as don't ask any questions, even in matters that are should be held very modest. These days we talk more than. So there was no manuals. There was nowhere for him to go. So he really wanted to learn this. Now, the bottom line is that questions need to be asked, and even if a rabbi states something, you can trust that person, but you need to ask him. If you have a question, where did you get that from? Why does it say this? Where does it say it? And are you sure? Is that really the law? Why would the law say that? Can you help understand it? There's nothing wrong with asking and explaining. And in fact, I encourage it a lot. I appreciate that. I do appreciate it. I'm not sure if I can answer the questions all the time, but that's the rule is the rule about the questions. All right. So let's go back to 45. Havaya, the ineffable divine name, or tetragrammaton, composed of the four letters Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, and pronounced in conversation as Havaya. Havaya is backwards of Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. You just don't want to say Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. Even the letters you try not to pronounce because they're so holy. So you just say Havaya, Hey, Vav, Yud, Hey. It's the opposite, backwards of Yud. There are numerous Hebrew names for God in scriptures, each of which express a different aspect or attribute of the divinity. Havaya refers to God the infinite, transcending creation and nature, time and space completely. The level of godliness which brings everything into existence ex nihilo. Ex nihilo is Latin for from nothing to something. Ex from zero, nihilo. X means something, nihilo from nil, from nothing. Thus, although Havaya indicates transcendent godliness, it nonetheless relates to Seder Hishtalshalut and God's involvement in creation, as we explained. You're talking about Havaya, that's God's great name. We don't even pronounce that name. That refers to a very high level, a level of creation. But since it's creation, it's the beginning of the link, because that's how creation works. It works in a state of order. There's a hierarchy, there's a top, there's a bottom. Okay, so the Torah, as the Ramban Nachmanides says, back to the narrative here, as the Ramban says, is not written in first person. It's not written that I said to Moses. That would be written by God. It's not written where Moses says, and God spoke to me. Rather, it's written in a third party. And God spoke to Moses saying, as if somebody's writing a story, a third person. Okay. The explanation for this, why would it be written in a third person? Why couldn't the Torah be written as a narrative that actually is happening? The explanation of this is that the third person is transcendent. The reference to a third party here means that there is a transcendent level that's really where this is coming from. This is not coming from God in his level of interaction with Moses. It's not coming from Moses with his interaction with God, but rather it's coming from a higher level of interaction, even higher, transcendent. The third person is transcendent. It transcends Moses and even transcends God's name, Havaya. Although the name Havaya represents past, present, and future as one, because that Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey have within those letters is Haya, Hey Yud Hey, which means was, V'hu Haya, V'hu Hoveh, V'hu Yihiyeh, V'hu Haya, and he was, V'hu Hoveh, and he is, V'hu Yihiyeh, and he will be. In other words, transcendent of time. He's the past, the present, and the future. Haya is Hebrew for was. Hoveh, Hey Vav Hey, is the Hebrew for present. V'hu Yihiyeh, which is also the Yud and the Hey and the Yud Hey there, which is also part of God's name, will be. All three time periods, past, present, and future, are all in that name of God. So that is a reference. That name, therefore, is a name that transcends time. In other words, it also transcends space. It's higher than world, higher than time, higher than anything. Time and space, as Einstein was just telling me the other day, are relative to one another. If you have space, you need to have time. And if you have time, you need to have space. Time only happens in a place where there is place. Where there is no place, there is no time. If there's no space, then there's no time, because time changes according to space. Time, if time is needed because I'm in a place, and I'm in a place and it has a certain amount of time, and the sun goes from here to there. It's all space. If there's no space, then there's no need for time. I'm not here to teach Einstein's theories, but that's how it works, and this is written in Hasidic teachings already from hundreds of years before. So Einstein got it right. Time and place are both relevant to one another. So when God creates the first day of creation, he creates the world, he creates light immediately. So that's the projection of time as it begins right around there. Then into the fourth day, he actually puts the planets in place and whatever. All right, so the bottom line is that the Havaya, because it's past, present, and future in the same place, it's all transcendent of any of that. It's above space, above time, and above space. Okay, so Havaya represents past, present, and future as one. It nonetheless relates to creation, i.e. to Hishtalshalut. It is related to creation because from that is the creation. That's how he creates. The aspect that transcends both of them, which is both Moses and Havaya, that the godly level, the third party level, the third person level, that transcends both of them, is the quintessence of the infinite, is the essence of the infinite. Blessed be he. It is he who speaks and tells about the words of Havaya to Moses, i.e. relating to what transpires within Hishtalshalut. In other words, it is that transcendent level that is above everything, which is where the Torah comes from. When people go through all of these studies about the Torah, it's written in different ways, and this professor wrote it, and that rabbi wrote it, and this guy must have written it. It's all Baal only. You're missing the whole point of that. They're not reading the Torah the way it's supposed to be written. They're supposed to be read. You're supposed to take focus on certain aspects of the Torah. One of them is, why would the Torah talk in third person? Which book talks like that? If it's a book of stories of history, then you don't really talk like that if you're writing it. If I'm writing what happened 1,000 years ago, then I write, and so-and-so said to so-and-so. But if I'm writing the history, it's me. I want to write what happened to me. So if I'm writing an article about the snow hitting Atlanta, it's not that the snow hit Atlanta and so-and-so. I was there. So I took me this amount of time. It's not third person, it's me writing it. If I'm writing about other people, I understand. But if I'm writing about myself, I'm writing what I did. So I was on the plane and I spoke to the so-and-so and he said to me this and I said back to him that. It's me. But so Moses is writing what's happening to them. God is writing what's happening right now. So why write in the third person? The reason is because God wants to indicate that there's something else going on here. It's coming from above anything. The Torah is the essence of God. And it's being written down on paper. So because it's the essence of God, it deals with what transcends the world. It's above anything. It's not really a storybook. It's not even a law book. It's the essence of God. It's what God wants. It's the will of God, the desire of God.
And also some of it hasn't happened yet. Well, when you wrote it.
No, nothing like that.
What?
No, that's not what happened.
What do you mean?
There's nothing in the Torah that was written ahead of time. The Torah itself writes, when the Torah was given, at that time when Moses was on the mountain, one of the things he did was transcribe from the beginning of creation until that point. And then God told him to add, and there's a discussion in the Talmud, how exactly it worked. According to one opinion, he wrote scroll by scroll. In other words, episode by episode, as God told him how to write it. Moses. Not every episode is written, not everything is recorded, whatever God wanted in there. Others say he kept on writing it by himself, and eventually, when he finished the whole thing, then he gave it to the Jewish people. Before that, he was just teaching orally. They didn't have any documents. And some say there was documents written as time moved on. Either way, what was given to the Jewish people was mainly the things that were happening to them. So for the first book and a half, nothing happened to them. It was Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Adam, Noah. But then from the last 3.5 books of the Torah, they were given to the people who witnessed this. That's another reason why you can't say that the Torah is not true. Because these people would have thrown it into the garbage. What are you trying to give me fantasies over here? None of this ever happened. Or it didn't happen this way. We would never be able to appreciate the Torah. If somebody wrote the history of the Atlanta snowstorm and said 5 feet of snow fell, and everybody was able to drive 30 miles an hour or a little bit more. And school buses somehow were sent out earlier, and then businesses were sent out 2 hours later, so it was staggered. And we managed to overcome the snow, and there were all kinds of plows and salt, and everything was cleaned off. And then in an hour, you would say, what kind of fantasies, what kind of baloney is this? You throw it in the garbage. You certainly wouldn't keep this and say, wow, you would never do that. So these people received a document, 3.5 books of it was all that happened to them. There was an exile, and there was plagues, and there was a splitting of the sea, and there was a giving of the Torah at Sinai, and there was manna falling from heaven, and they were having water from a well, and they had this miracle and that miracle and this unusual thing, and God spoke to them, and then these people were hurt because they were there, and a spy went in, and God said you have to stay 40 years. All of this have to have happened. No normal person would ever receive a document, and certainly not millions of people who were there, because that's how many people were there. No one would accept a document like that. Who would ever receive that? Unless we want to say that our ancestors were a bunch of dummies, and you could have sold them anything you want, which is, nobody would accept that either. So the Torah is written, and you have to look at the Torah, and you see that the Torah is written in the third person then. Why would you be written in the third person then? Right, what happened? We were there, just right, we saw it. Only the 5th book has words like that, words that Moses himself said to the people. Not the 4 books, the other 4 books. And the reason is because that comes from a level that is above God's name, that even the great name of God that creates, that creation aspect, that creation element means that this name is a connection to the regular, normal link chain, the chain reactions, how things just happen, but not from the transcendent level. God wants to emphasize in the Torah that there is a transcendent level of communication here that anyone can get involved with, which is even higher than the name of God, that is higher than time and space. Because even the one that's higher than time and space ultimately is connected to creation. And creation is not a transcendent level, but is a normal. This is creation. So let's look at 49 and 50. Atzmut u'mahut ein sof. In Hebrew, that's what it word in Hebrew. Literally, it means the self and essence, or essence and substance of God. The phrase refers to the essence of God, or God himself beyond all definition. That means higher than the Havaya name. Transcending all description, Atzmut cannot possibly be defined or evaluated in any way or have any attributed properties. That's 49. 50. The communication between Havaya and Moses that is described in the Torah refers to a degree of divine revelation that was communicated to Moses and that Moses in turn perceived. As most references to God in the Torah are in the third person, they refer to a degree of divine revelation, and not directly to God's essence. At the giving of the Torah, however, God refers to his essence in the third person. I am the Lord your God. He doesn't say, the Lord your God said. The first word of the 10 Commandments is Anochi. I. That's how he starts. This is my essence. I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. That's the first commandment. In other words, I'm revealing to you my essence now, that you should at least know that there is an essence to get to know. That's the first commandment that Maimonides also focuses upon. It's not the first commandment the Jews received, but the first of the 10 Commandments obviously is the most important one because that was the greatest revelation of godliness, and that was the first word God said. Anochi, it is me. I am talking. This time he doesn't use, and God said, this is him. He says, and God said the following, I am God. Gets to the essence. Okay. We will now, so next week we will continue along this idea of the third part. There's a lot of Kabbalah coming up now, some deep, heavy, mystical stuff that is on its way. And so we'll leave that for next week.
Wow.
Thank you.